Hello, welcome to yet another edition of the Digital Rights Africa podcast, where we talk about everything data protection and privacy, cybersecurity, child online protection, and intellectual property issues in Africa. Today, I have been joined by an executive from the Information Regulator of South Africa in the name of Mr. Mukelani Dimba. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So we've had a few other regulators here in the past, and for us as the Africa Digital Rights Hub, it's really important to follow the progress that regulators are making in this space. And we see South Africa as a very, very important and strategic partner, if not possible, leading the continent in this space. I know that, the regulator just begun its, implementing the law. How has it been so far?
Wow. Our legislation was passed in 2013.
Yes.
We got our members of the regulator appointed in 2016. But really the administration, the institution, came into establishment about 3 years ago.
Yes.
But it feels like it's been 20 years.
Wow. That means a lot has gone on. Please share with us what is currently happening.
A lot has gone on. Firstly, you have the challenge of setting up a new institution.
Yes.
And that's not an easy feat. And I know you've had a similar experience in Ghana. It takes a lot of hard work. And for the longest of time, for about 5 years or so, the regulator was only 5 people. So we've had to build the institution from scratch. We had to attract the necessary skills and talent. We had to set up the right kind of policies to enable us to fulfill our obligations in terms of the enabling legislation. But never mind the fact that we had to set up an institution. We had to deal with issues, with cases that are emerging as people are grappling with this idea of data protection, because it's a new thing, it's a new concept, not only in South Africa, but throughout the continent. We are all, even globally, we are all beginning this journey to try and understand what does it actually mean to protect personal information. So we've really had to, as my CEO says, we have to fly the plane as we are building it.
Yeah, in my country we like to say hit the ground running.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and if you don't take care, you crash land.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But what has been the major challenges that you have faced in this journey?
I think the main one is the one that relates to who we are as an institution in South Africa. The Protection of Personal Information Act, POPIA, we call it POPIA for short, requires of us to be an independent institution. We report only to the National Assembly, we report to Parliament.
Yeah.
But we still rely on the state, we still rely on ministries of the executive to support us with budget support, with structures that we need to do our work. So the question of independence has been a difficult one, because we need to show our independence so that we can execute our mandate effectively. So an interesting one that we're dealing with is the fact that our parent ministry, I will say parent, because that's where we are linked right now, the Ministry of Justice, they suffered a data breach, which we had to investigate.
You have to deal with the reality of, are you independent or not?
Absolutely. So it's issues like those where we are still crawling, but we also need to assert our independence. So I think that has been the biggest
How have you been able to, deal with this issue of independence and then government? Because I think it's not just Africa, right? Across the world, governments are actually one of the largest data controllers, and they process large amounts of personal data.
Absolutely.
And as you rightly said, there was a breach. Just recently, I have seen issues around cybersecurity breaches within the US government and the like. And we see it all over. So how have you worked with governments when you face issues such as that?
You simply must follow the law to its logical conclusion. Our laws are very strong, generally, on the African continent. So when a a circumstance such as a data breach occurs, you need to follow what is provided for in the legislation to deal with that data breach. The moment you begin to hedge, because you don't want to upset government department or institutions, that's when we lose our credibility.
That's the issue. That is always a challenge, and we've seen a number of regulators go through this area. But having said that, I mean, that's another issue, because to be able to really tackle compliance, you have to build capacity. You mentioned that in the last 2 years, that's when you've really been building the operational side of implementing this law. What has that been like for us? Because my experience with Ghana, I've shared it on many platforms, was extremely difficult. So how have you gone around it?
Extremely, extremely difficult. Remember that this is a very technical area. It's a very technical area of law. It's a very technical area of technology. And this work that we are doing sits at the intersection of technology and law. So where are you going to get the skills?
And
because we're competing with the private sector.
That's something I was going to ask you. But some time ago, I heard the budget that had been voted by your parliament for your regulator, and I was like, wow, I wish I had half of that budget. But how has that been? Because I know that it's still a challenge. So far, how have you mitigated that gap?
It hasn't been easy. But firstly, I need to give credit to our parliament, to the government, for having given us the resources that we need to fulfill our mandate in terms of the law. And unlike other institutions who have had to cut down on their budgets, we've been very lucky. Parliament and government has been very supportive in terms of giving us resources we need to build this institution. However, as we said, the type of skills that we need for this work to be carried out are very technical skills. And we find ourselves having to compete with your big tech companies. And we simply cannot afford to match some of the compensation packages that are offered in the private sector. But we've been lucky in a way that we've been able to attract very highly skilled lawyers. I think where we are lacking is in terms of the technologists. This is where we're feeling the pinch, because the market is such as it is. We struggle to attract the necessary kind of person who will be able to really help us push the kind of work that we're doing, especially with regards to data breaches.
When I was in Ghana, in terms of capacity building, and look, I didn't have half the resource. I won't even say I had 1% of the resources that you have in terms of human capacity. We had to think about innovative ways, and when I say we, the board then directing affairs had to push the executive to find innovative ways. We explored areas like strategic partnerships, for instance, in the development of guidelines for sectors, right? So that means that we're working directly with the sectors, which means that the knowledge and skill set in the sectors is made available to the regulator. And then, have you found any such innovative ways around some of these challenges, and what are they?
It's a tricky area, really a tricky area. In terms of the enforcement work, in terms of the policy work, we've been very, greedy to keep it to ourselves, because we want to make sure that whatever products that we put out there are credible products that are unassailable. So, to the extent of developing policy and procedures, that we've kept it internally. Where we've had more space to get into partnerships and collaborations has been on the education side, public awareness side of things, and investigations of security compromises, because as I said, we lack the skills in that area. So, for example, where there is a data breach, we would contract the work out to a specialist entity to do the investigations on our behalf. But really, it's not the legal part, it's the technology part where we contract that kind of work.
Okay. Have you been forced to go to court on any of those issues yet?
Not yet.
Okay, because that would be an interesting test to see how the courts are going to look at, you know, a third party's assessments and all of that.
Yeah.
But that's very interesting. So now let's talk about some of the bigger issues. I see the South African regulator looking at your country itself and how it's strategically positioned, even in terms of the technology sector and some of the resources that it has farmed out to the rest of Africa. I see the regulator, as I mentioned earlier, as a leader in this space. I know that you haven't even had breathing space to look within your own jurisdiction, but has there been a thought around, you know, the continental issues, the regional issues, and how are you tackling those?
We have a fairly comprehensive international cooperation program. Essentially, in terms of that program, what we were trying to do is to expose ourselves to what is happening outside South Africa, because that's very important. These global norms and standards, they need to find expression in the work that we do ourselves. So that part is very important. So we are part of a number of networks, whether it's the Global Privacy Assembly, GPA, and other regional structures. Now, in terms of us sharing what we have learned so far with the continent, we do engage with our sister institutions, the data protection authorities, on one-on-one levels. We've just entered into a memorandum of understanding between ourselves and Mauritius.
Oh, that's beautiful. It will be probably one of the first ones I'm hearing about.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that peer learning work that we try and do as much as we can. Because I need to emphasize the point of global norms, regional norms and standards. We need to be influenced by them, and we also need to influence how those norms and standards get developed. Yeah. So that's the type of work that we do. Our members are all over the continent, taking part in various processes on the African continent.
That's amazing. So really, where are you now as a regulator?
As the regulator, if you speak to any South African, they would express a slight feeling of disappointment with where things are, especially in terms of the legislation, largely because of the fact that people are still receiving unsolicited phone calls.
Yeah, that's always one of the first things to deal
So people
with.
are angry. Why am I still being called? What is this POPIA about if people are still calling me, selling me stuff? So we've done a lot of good work in terms of creating public awareness, so people know about POPIA, the law. But people want to start seeing action by the regulator against responsible parties that are seen to be violating the law. So we currently have about 1,000 complaints that we're investigating. We've recently set up an enforcement committee, which is an external committee of experts who are really receivers. They receive our investigations, they vet our investigations, and then they make recommendations to the members of the regulator on what needs to be done on each complaint. So there's going to be quite a hive of activity in terms of us, showing that we've got teeth and those teeth bite.
And when it comes to industry, how have you dealt with the issue of compliance?
It's been a bit of a mixed bag, I must say. I really must give credit to the financial sector. Financial sector has gone far ahead all other sectors in terms of compliance. They started putting implementation blocks in place way before our enforcement powers came into force last year. So they're doing good work there. Where we have concerns, it's with the direct marketing sector. That remains
an issue,
an area of concern. We have differences around interpretation of certain provisions.
I can imagine.
to put it diplomatically.
Yeah.
But we engage with the sectors, with various sectors. We have a very robust stakeholder engagement program. We do about 12 stakeholder engagements in a month, where we're dealing with various industry bodies. So talk is happening.
Okay.
Talk is
All
happening.
right.
Yeah.
That's great to know. Now, you had mentioned also that you've been working with other regulators, both at the African level, and here I want to particularly narrow down to this big dream that we have in the Africa continental free trade area. Have you made any plans around that, and how are you really looking at it from the regulatory perspective?
The plans are not concrete yet, because it's still a fairly new policy framework. But where I think we're going to have to make our positions quite clear is with regards to border data flows.
Yeah.
Like each of our countries, those with the data protection laws, the law only applies domestically, doesn't apply to when the data crosses the border.
Yeah.
So I think as we have these regional instruments, recently we were talking about the African Union's data policy framework.
Yeah.
We need those enablers that will sort of cover the area such that there is clarity around the flow of data across borders. We can do our bit in terms of our obligations in South Africa. For example, we're drafting a guidance note for the industry on issues around transporter flow of data. But what then happens once it's gone across the borders? Who on the other side will enforce some of the requirements that we have put in place? So I really do think we need to have an instrument that will enable data protection authorities to cooperate effectively on the issue of transporter data flows. We're not there yet.
And who do you think should be leading that charge? So I keep asking everybody that takes the seat, right? And because they always seem to know, something should happen. But I just want to throw that to you. Who should be leading this charge?
I recently read a very good paper by a Nigerian scholar who was placing the challenge squarely at the feet of the AU. Squarely to say, look, we've got the Malabo Convention, it's quite limited. Now there is the data policy framework of the AU. AU should take the lead. Of course, it's a huge structure. It doesn't work as rapidly as we would like it to, but I think data protection authorities themselves need to self-organize. I think civil society organizations need to challenge us as data protection authorities to begin to take this matter seriously. Because it's not enough to say there is a strong law in South Africa, there's a strong law in Ghana, there's a strong law in Mauritius, while we know that the biggest problem is in terms of implementation
of those laws.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. There's a lot that I would really, really want us to go into, but our time is up. Any final words for our community?
Maybe two. Firstly, to thank you and your team for bringing this important conversation to Mzansi down south. As you could see from the venue, it was full of our practitioners who really are interested to learn more, and it was a massive learning experience for some of our practitioners. So thank you. But I think what we need to do as practitioners in this space, especially data protection authorities, is to take the conversation away from us as this group, from yourselves as legal experts and civil society organizations. we need to be able to show why this is important for ordinary people in our communities. Because I fear that this is where the most violations are taking place in terms of data protection. This is where most people's data gets exploited for commercial use in a number of instances against their interest as data subjects. So I think that is the challenge for all of us, to begin to animate this issue and bring it quite vivid in the imagination of ordinary people. You and I get it. We understand why important it is, but I think the next step is to be able to show why it is important to people who are not in this space.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dimba, for joining us. You heard it all. I think my biggest takeaway today is that, you know, we need to do a lot more in bringing the data protection and privacy issues to the ordinary African out there. Thank you once again for joining us. My name is Teki, and come back again next time on another episode of the Digital Rights Africa podcast, where we talk about everything data protection and privacy, cybersecurity, child online protection, and intellectual property issues in Africa. Bye-bye for now.